welcome to the channel. Today, we're diving into a topic that's often misunderstood and even feared by many men: the art and dark psychology of ignoring a woman. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, let me be crystal clear. This isn't about being cruel, manipulative, or playing childish games. What we're exploring is a very real psychological dynamic that plays out in relationships, and it can reveal hard truths about attraction, boundaries, and emotional control that most people never talk about openly. I've spent years as a therapist sitting across from men who feel confused, frustrated, and sometimes powerless when a woman pulls away or becomes distant. And I've watched one pattern repeat. When a man learns to apply selective attention and emotional distance consciously and respectfully, it can completely shift how she perceives him. Ignoring, in this context, isn't punishment. It's strategy, clarity, and self-respect. It's creating space that allows both people to see each other more honestly, without unnecessary pressure or neediness. A lot of people will call this manipulation. I'll tell you straight. It feels uncomfortable because it challenges the script society hands men. Always chase, always respond, always bend to her mood. But from my experience, when men truly understand the psychology behind selective attention and emotional distance, relationships often gain clarity, respect, and even attraction. I've seen it turn around situations where communication had broken down, where a man felt invisible, or where a woman had emotionally checked out. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly why ignoring can have such a powerful psychological impact, how it influences attraction, and the subtle power it gives you when done correctly. I'll also share real stories from my practice, moments that were eye-opening, controversial, and sometimes uncomfortable to witness. By the end, you'll understand not only how to do it, but why it works, what it reveals about human behavior, and why it can rebalance respect and attention in your relationships. Before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below saying, "I'm subscribed." Let's get into it. Section 1. Why ignoring works. The hidden psychology. When we talk about ignoring a woman, most people immediately assume it means being cold, harsh, or emotionally detached. But over years of therapy sessions, I've learned that ignoring isn't about cruelty. It's about understanding human behavior at a deeper level. It's tapping into a psychological truth many men overlook. Attention is powerful, and how you give it or withhold it shapes perception more than words ever could. I remember one man sitting across from me, frustrated because he felt invisible in his relationship. He was constantly trying to please, respond, chase, and with every effort, she pulled further away. When I asked him to consider what would happen if he simply stopped reacting to every mood swing, if he created space and focused on his own life, he was skeptical. He thought ignoring would push her away for good, but the truth is often the exact opposite. By not over-investing attention, by not filling every moment with validation, you give her mind room to notice, reflect, and even question her own feelings. Psychologists call this emotional contrast. When someone is used to constant attention, and that attention suddenly reduces, the brain experiences a subtle shift. Curiosity rises, desire gets triggered, people begin evaluating what they may have taken for granted. This isn't magic, it's biology. I've seen it play out countless times in practice, in situations where men felt powerless, when they learned to create respectful distance. The women they cared about often approached with genuine interest, clarity, and sometimes vulnerability. Let's be very clear, this isn't manipulation, it's self-respect and balance. Many men I work with confuse attention with love or validation with worth. Ignoring, when done intentionally, is a way to reclaim your own emotional center instead of reacting to someone else's fluctuating feelings. It teaches a subtle truth: your presence is valuable and shouldn't be given indiscriminately. What makes this controversial and sparks debate is that society tells men to always chase, always respond, always bend. But when you step back and stop overextending, it challenges expectations. And that challenge creates intrigue. It feels uncomfortable at first, but from my experience, it forces honesty on both sides. You gain clarity on whether she truly values you, whether she's invested, and whether the relationship is built on authentic connection rather than habit or convenience. So the hidden psychology of ignoring isn't about punishing her or playing games. It's about understanding attraction, setting boundaries, and creating emotional contrast. It's giving both of you the space needed to see the relationship clearly and value each other authentically. In the next section, we'll explore the thin line between silence and neglect, because that's where many men stumble. But understanding it can completely transform how your relationships unfold. Section 2. The thin line between silence and neglect. Silence is powerful, but it's also dangerous when misunderstood. One of the most common mistakes I see men make when trying to practice what we're discussing, ignoring the right way, is crossing into neglect. Neglect isn't mysterious, it's simply absence without intention. And the emotional impact is completely different from the controlled distance we're talking about. In my practice, I've seen men who genuinely want to create space, but instead withdraw in a way that confuses or hurts the woman they care about. The result? Frustration, resentment, and sometimes complete disconnection. Think of it this way. When you ignore with purpose, it's selective and conscious. You're aware of your emotions, your time, your energy. You're not disappearing because you're angry, annoyed, or trying to punish. You're stepping back to reset the dynamic and allow her to reflect on her own behavior. That's why I often ask the men I work with to pause and ask themselves, am I creating space or am I running from discomfort? The difference is massive, and it determines whether the interaction builds attraction or erodes it. I remember one man I worked with who was constantly overextending, double texting, over-explaining, adjusting everything to her mood. He thought he was showing care, but in reality, he was diluting his value. When he began intentionally pausing his responses, letting her initiate, and focusing on his own life, something shifted. It wasn't cruelty. It was presence through absence. She began noticing the space he was holding for himself, and that triggered respect and curiosity. That's the thin line. Distance becomes attractive when it's intentional. Neglect becomes destructive when it's careless. Educating men on this isn't just about strategy. It's about emotional intelligence. It's understanding that relationships aren't one-way streets where your attention is owed or expected. It's recognizing that your emotional energy is finite, and giving it selectively rather than freely is a reflection of self-worth. When you fall into neglect, you're essentially saying, I don't care enough to engage thoughtfully. And that kills attraction faster than almost anything else. The challenge is that society rarely teaches men to value their own emotional boundaries. We're told to chase, to please, to fix. But stepping back, creating intentional silence, and understanding its psychological impact is a skill few men develop. When done right, it's fascinating. She starts noticing your calm, your consistency, your self-mastery. She begins evaluating not just her feelings, but her own behavior and investment. That's where transformation happens on both sides. So the lesson is simple. Silence works, but only when it's controlled, intentional, and emotionally intelligent. The moment it becomes careless or reactive, it loses its power and risks emotional damage. Learning the difference between intentional distance and neglect is crucial for any man who wants to navigate relationships with clarity, respect, and influence. In the next section, we'll break down what her emotional reactions really mean when you start practicing this strategy, because understanding her psychology is just as important as mastering your own. Section 3. Emotional reactions. What her behavior really means. One of the most fascinating and misunderstood parts of relationships is how women emotionally respond when a man begins to pull back. I've spent years observing this dynamic unfold in therapy sessions, and I can tell you these reactions are rarely random. They're deeply rooted in psychology, attachment patterns, and perceived value. If you don't understand them, you'll misinterpret her behavior and sabotage your own efforts. I remember working with one man who decided to stop replying instantly to every text, call, and mood swing. At first, he was anxious. She reacted. She became distant, irritable, even slightly cold. Naturally, he panicked, thinking he'd ruined everything. But here's the truth I explained to him. What he was seeing wasn't rejection. It was her emotional recalibration. When a woman suddenly notices a man isn't constantly available, her brain begins processing the change. She starts wondering why, reflecting on her own behavior, and sometimes feeling what she may have taken for granted. Reactions vary. Some women become more attentive. Some test boundaries. Some may even withdraw further at first. None of that is failure. It's simply a human response to change. I often tell men that her first emotional reaction is rarely her final state. It's a signal, not a verdict. Understanding that distinction is essential. Men who panic and overthink at this stage are the ones who unintentionally reinforce the very patterns they're trying to break. Her emotional reactions are also a mirror of her internal needs and insecurities. In sessions, I've seen women respond to selective attention with curiosity, reflection, and even admiration when a man stays calm, grounded, and consistent. Conversely, if the man reacts emotionally, chases, or seeks constant reassurance, it can trigger tension and resentment. What many men don't realize is that her behavior is often a reflection. It shows how she perceives your value, your boundaries, your emotional stability. That's where awareness matters. Understanding these emotional reactions lets you handle them without losing yourself. It's not about controlling her feelings, it's about holding your own center while letting her process hers. When you do this correctly, those reactions become informative instead of threatening. You start seeing patterns. When she notices your calm presence, she often becomes more thoughtful. When you hold space for yourself, she evaluates her investment more honestly. So the lesson for every man is straightforward. These emotional responses are signals, not judgments. Learn to observe without overreacting. Recognize the difference between curiosity, testing, and genuine disinterest. And above all, stay anchored in your own emotional authority. When you do, ignoring stops being a tactic and becomes a powerful tool for clarity and attraction, helping both of you see the relationship more honestly. Section 4. The power of self-worth and attraction. I want to tell you about a man I worked with in therapy. Let's call him David to protect confidentiality. David had been in a relationship for about a year and felt frustrated. He was constantly giving attention, checking in multiple times a day, adjusting his schedule to meet her needs. On the surface, he looked like the perfect partner. Underneath, he was exhausted, anxious, and slowly losing his sense of self. She wasn't appreciating his efforts the way he hoped, and he was starting to feel invisible. When we explored the situation together, it became clear the main issue wasn't her. It was that David had lost sight of his own value. He equated attention with worth. And here's the essential truth most men overlook. Women are instinctively drawn to men who know their own value and don't overextend themselves for validation. Attraction isn't about chasing or proving. It's about being grounded, confident, and emotionally independent. I asked David to run an experiment. Instead of replying instantly to every message or rearranging his life around her mood, he began creating space. He didn't ignore her to punish. He prioritized his own life, interests, and emotional energy. He started going to the gym regularly again, pursuing personal projects, reconnecting with friends. What happened next was remarkable. She began noticing the change. In noticing it, she started reaching out more often, initiating conversations, and showing renewed interest when they were together. David's experience illustrates a simple but powerful principle. Self-worth is the foundation of attraction. When a man knows he has value beyond the relationship, it naturally shifts the dynamic. You stop reacting to every emotional cue she sends. You stop chasing approval or validation. Instead, your presence becomes measured and intentional, which creates respect and curiosity. I've watched this pattern play out countless times in practice. Men who anchor in their own worth often experience a transformation in the relationship, sometimes immediately, sometimes gradually, but consistently. David's story also highlights a subtle but critical point. Self-worth isn't arrogance or detachment, it's clarity. It's showing up as someone complete and sure of himself. When she feels that, she feels safe to be herself, and also challenged in a healthy way. The relationship becomes less about dependency and more about mutual respect and authentic connection. So if there's one lesson from David's experience, it's this: your self-worth is the bedrock of attraction. Ignoring, pulling back, or creating intentional space works because it signals you're grounded, independent, and worthy of respect. Women respond to that naturally. They respond to a man who is whole on his own, not a man who needs constant reassurance. And the beauty of it is that the moment you embrace your own value, you stop trying to manipulate outcomes. You simply become a man who commands respect and inspires desire without forcing it. Section 5. Common mistakes men make when ignoring. I want to share the story of a man I worked with. Let's call him Eric. Eric was in a relationship where he felt undervalued and constantly anxious about his partner's attention. He had learned the concept of selective attention, pulling back and not overextending, and he wanted to try it. But like many men, he made common mistakes that turned a potentially powerful strategy into confusion and tension. Eric's first mistake was reacting emotionally. The moment she seemed distant or didn't reply immediately, he panicked. He sent multiple texts, over-explained, or tried to fix her mood. That's one of the most frequent traps I see. Men interpret emotional withdrawal as rejection and forget that intentional space is about clarity, not pursuit. Reacting emotionally defeats the purpose because it signals constant need and instability. Another mistake Eric made was ignoring too much, too abruptly. He misunderstood the difference between strategic distance and total absence. At first, he wouldn't respond for days, thinking it would make her value him more. Instead, she felt neglected and confused. In therapy, I helped him see that ignoring needs to be measured and conscious, not random or excessive. The goal isn't to create fear or frustration, it's to maintain your presence while showing you respect your own boundaries. Eric's third mistake was expecting immediate results. Many men I counsel believe that the moment they pull back, she'll suddenly appreciate them or become more attentive. Relationships are more complex than that. Emotional reactions don't follow a script. By expecting instant validation, Eric set himself up for disappointment, which often led to overcompensation. Finally, Eric struggled because he confused ignoring with manipulation. He feared that creating distance meant playing games or being unfair. What I emphasized, and what I want every man to understand, is that this isn't manipulation. It's self-respect, emotional regulation, and healthy boundary setting. The moment you approach it with clarity and integrity, you avoid the common trap of using silence as punishment. By the end of our sessions, Eric had learned to apply selective attention correctly. He didn't overreact, didn't disappear completely, and didn't chase validation. What changed was remarkable. His partner began initiating conversations, showing interest, and engaging more sincerely. The tension eased, not because he forced it, but because he created space while staying anchored in his worth. The takeaway for every man is clear. Ignoring only works when it's intentional, measured, and patient. Emotional reactivity, excess, expecting instant results, and confusing it with manipulation are the mistakes that sabotage this approach. When you avoid those pitfalls, you protect not only your self-worth, but also create a dynamic where attraction, respect, and emotional clarity can naturally flourish. Section 6. How distance can spark reflection and desire. I want to share the story of a couple I worked with in therapy, focusing on the man. Let's call him Michael. Michael felt stuck in his relationship for months. He was constantly available, replying instantly to every message, adjusting his schedule to hers, trying to anticipate every mood. On the surface, he looked fully invested. Underneath, he was drained, anxious, and starting to feel invisible. During one session, I suggested Michael experiment with distance, not as punishment, but as a tool for clarity. That meant being less immediately available, focusing on his own life, and giving her space to initiate. At first, he was terrified. He feared she'd pull away completely, but he trusted the process. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. She began reflecting on her own behavior. She noticed his absence, and instead of withdrawing further, she started reaching out more intentionally, asking questions, sharing more about her day, showing renewed interest in him. Michael's experience illustrates a simple but powerful psychological principle. Distance creates room for reflection. When someone is used to constant attention, it becomes part of their emotional baseline. Suddenly pulling back disrupts that baseline and forces reevaluation. Women in particular are sensitive to changes in attention because it challenges their expectations and allows them to see what they may have taken for granted. In therapy, I often explain this to men as creating emotional contrast. It's not manipulation. It's giving both of you the chance to see the relationship clearly. Distance also sparks desire because it restores a sense of mystery and independence. When Michael stopped overextending, he wasn't just less available. He was showing he had a full, meaningful life outside the relationship. That self-clarity drew her attention in a way constant availability never could. She began approaching him with curiosity and genuine interest rather than simply reacting to his presence. It's important to note that this only works when distance is intentional and measured. Random or careless withdrawal creates frustration and confusion, which can damage the relationship. Michael's success came from maintaining his calm, consistency, and integrity while giving her room to reflect. In my practice, I've seen similar results countless times. Men who set thoughtful boundaries and create distance often inspire deeper engagement and connection from their partner. The key lesson here is that distance isn't about games or punishment. It's about allowing the relationship to breathe and giving her the opportunity to recognize your value. Michael's story shows that when done right, stepping back can transform a stagnant dynamic into one filled with reflection, desire, and mutual respect, because both partners finally see each other clearly.